Good morning, dear. Laura is homesick, and Bruce is still in the hospital, and the Spangenbergs are in Phoenix. So we will begin. Questions, comments, anything from the group here that wants answered immediately or sooner? Questions? No? All right. I got a question this week. Kind of a common question, really, in general. Person asked, since Cornelius in Acts chapter 10 is a Roman, is a pagan, or pagan Roman, and why then did, because we say that God only hears the prayers of believers, okay? So Cornelius prayed, and God answered his prayer and sent Peter to him. And the question then comes, well, how come God listened to the prayer of Cornelius? Cornelius being a Roman, why was that? Well, if you read closely, you find out that Cornelius was a Roman, that's true, but he had converted to Judaism. That is, he was a Jewish convert. So he was a Jew. The person who's asking the question also noted that, said, well, he's a Jew, which this is a time after Christ has ascended. It's after Pentecost, and some time after Pentecost. And so it's considered, the person that's asking the question said, well, you know, Jews are unbelievers. And so again, why would God even okay, he's a Roman, but he's not pagan anymore. He's Jewish. That is, he's converted to the religion of the Jews. But there again, the person considered Jews to be unbelievers. Well, actually, in the time after Christ, or even during the time of Christ, you might say, during Christ's ministry and even after Christ's ministry, after his ascension, after Pentecost, Jews were not considered to be unbelievers unless they had rejected Christ as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies of the Messiah. So Cornelius was a Jew by conversion, and he was a Jew who believed in the coming Messiah. And so even though he lived, or this event anyway, occurs after the time of Christ's ministry, after his ascension, after Pentecost, he's considered to be a believer. All Jews who were looking for the Messiah, no matter where they were in the world, were considered believers, are to be considered believers, until and up to the point where they hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah that was promised in the Old Testament and fulfilled the Old Testament law and sacrificed himself for the sins of the world, etc. If they reject that, then they are unbelievers. If they don't reject that, then of course they are Christians, although they may not consider themselves part of that Christian group yet. They may consider themselves Jews of the fulfillment, or what we today would refer to as Messianic Jews, or Jews that believe that the Messiah has already come. Okay? The same is true today then. Jews who, let's say, want to keep the Old Testament law out of conviction. They just believe that it's a good thing to do. It's a good way to organize their lives. But they believe that Jesus of Nazareth is the fulfillment of the Messianic promises. They are to be considered believers. This goes to a little bit broader question too. The person asking the question is of Baptist background. And so the person of the Baptist background looks at anyone who has not been baptized through immersion and has not had a conversion experience a moment of enlightenment or a moment of decision or conversion and cannot pinpoint that moment, cannot describe that moment, cannot give a time and a day to that moment, is unbeliever. That's their theology. Okay, that's what their theology tells them. You can't point to a time where you went from unbeliever to believer. Okay, and if you weren't then baptized through immersion, then you're really not converted. You're really not a believer. You're an unbeliever, and you're going to hell. All right. So, in the broader schemes of things, they look upon anybody, including Lutherans and all Roman Christians, Catholic, what we call Catholics, Episcopalians, a lot of Methodists, Presbyterians, etc., as unsaved, and therefore ripe for conversion, ripe to be converted. So, if a Baptist missionary person, for example, knocks on your door and says, are you saved? And you say yes, they're going to ask you a couple questions. They're going to ask you, okay, when were you saved? Okay, and if you say, well, I was baptized when I was 10 days old, they will say, oh, yeah, you ain't saved. Okay. Or if you say something along the lines of, well, I joined the Lutheran Church or the Roman Church when I was 22 or whatever. And then they will say, well, you're still not saved. They look upon all Roman Catholics as damned. Okay? And 99% of Lutherans and most other denominations also. You don't hear that very often. You don't hear that said. They don't say it very often. But that's their theology. I guarantee you that's their theology. I know it very, very well myself. So that's where the question is coming from. How could Cornelius been saved? He hadn't been baptized by immersion, as far as we know, and he still clung to Jewish traditions. But that doesn't matter. He was a Messianic Jew, that is, he believed in the coming Messiah. And of course, we also know that when Peter actually visited him and talked to him, then he believed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah, and he and his whole family were baptized, probably by sprinkling or pouring, not by immersion. Very few people, if any, were baptized by immersion in the early years of the New Testament. So the question comes then from a misunderstanding and a false understanding, a false teaching, really, about conversion and about who is saved and who is not. Okay. Questions on that or anything else? Okay. Let us proceed. I'm going to try and move along here a little bit. Making our way through chapter 32 of Exodus. And we're now to the section, verse 25 and following. Let's read a little bit of that. Read down to 29. Now when Moses saw the people were out of control, for Aaron had let them get out of control to be a derision among their enemies, Moses stood at the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered together with him. He said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, every man of you put his sword upon his thigh, and go back and forth from gate to gate in the camp, and kill every man his brother, and every man his friend, and every man his neighbor." So the sons of Levi did as Moses instructed, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, "Dedicate yourselves today to the Lord, for every man has been against his son and against his brother, in order that he may bestow a blessing upon you today." Very difficult section. Very difficult section to hear, and in some ways, very difficult section to interpret. The gate that we're talking about here is the entranceway to the camp. The camp of Israel, and we can talk about this a little bit more once we get them back on the journey, but the camp of Israel now had or will have soon, the tabernacle in the center, and then the various 12 tribes around the center, okay? So here's the center, there's the tabernacle. And then the 12 tribes, I don't know if that's 12 or not, I don't care. But basically this kind of arrangement, okay? And so the gate of the camp, okay, there would be various gates, okay? There would be a gate, if you will, at the front of the camp and a gate at the back of the camp, a gate to the side and a gate to this side, right? So there would be, and then you might say there would be sentries, guards, guard posts, whatever, situated around the camp. At the head of the camp would be the pillar of fire. Let's say the head's down here. We would have the pillar of fire at night and the pillar of cloud or smoke during the day. Going from gate to gate would mean that you're going throughout the entire camp. You're going throughout the entire 12 tribes. Going from one end to the other and from one side to the other. Okay. Again, we're not sure in whose eyes the Israelites were a derision, or some translations say foolish. Where were they? Again, at this time, they are out here in this area. Okay. The Edomites are over here. The Moabites are over here. There are some Midianites here. Is it in the eyes of the Midianites? That's the most logical thought. The Midianites are not yet their enemies. They will be at soon, but right now they're not. So who is this that they're talking about? We don't know. Was this the Egyptians? We know that Egyptian outposts were scattered throughout the Sinai and along the Red Sea here. Mining outposts, military outposts, naval outposts. Okay. Did the Egyptians see this behavior, this raucous, this orgy that took place during the worship of the golden calf? Perhaps. Did the Midianites witness this? Perhaps. We don't know. But the comment is simply made that these people made a fool of themselves. This was embarrassing, obviously, to God, and God decided to chastise them. So first of all, whoever comes to me, and all the sons of Levi gathered. Now, did anybody else? Doesn't say. Just because it says that the sons of Levi gathered does not mean that none of the other members of the other tribes gathered. Okay? It's not exclusive. It doesn't say only the sons of Levi gathered with Moses. But from this we assume that the vast majority, maybe even 100% of the sons of Levi, the priests, the Levitical order, all gathered with Moses, all stood with Moses. But perhaps there were others too. We simply do not know. And then this very difficult one, every man of you get your sword. Everybody had a sword. Everybody had a sword. Okay? This would be like me telling you all, go home and get your gun. Go home and get your gun, bring your pistol, bring your rifle, whatever, back to church. That's what it would be like. Okay? And then go back and forth from gate to gate. So from one side to the other, from top to bottom, from corner to corner even, you might say, go through the camp. And kill every man his brother, every man his friend, every man his neighbor. Based on what? We're not told. It is, I think, clear, however, from the text, since Moses says, everyone who's for the Lord, come to me, then those who did not gather with Moses would be people who were not for the Lord. In other words, these would be people who would say, we throw our lot in with the God of the golden calf, or with the golden calf. Okay? I think that's fairly clear from the context of the verses. Now, again, I say a lot of people may have gathered with the Levites. Otherwise, again, you've got 5 million people. At least 500,000 to 600,000 of them, even maybe 700,000 of them, are men of military age. When the Bible talks about men and brothers and neighbors and sons, that's what he's talking about. He's talking of people of military age, basically from 20 to 50, males of 20 to 50. There's at least, as I say, anywhere from 500,000 to 700,000 in this group of 5 million people. The fact that only 3,000 were killed tells me, and I think should tell anybody reading this, that those who chose to stay with the golden calf, or those who actually said, no, I want to worship the golden calf, I'm with the golden calf thing, okay, were few. Because you've got the Levites, and again, if it's all the Levites, you got 100,000 guys with swords. If 100,000 guys with swords are going through the population of the people looking for those who are going to worship the golden calf, they're going to find more than 3,000 if the other 500,000 have chosen to go with the golden calf, you see? So this sounds very gruesome, especially when you see the word every. Kill every man, every neighbor, every brother, whoa. All right? So if even one of the Levites kill one other person on their way through the camp, that's 100,000 people dead right there. Probably more. So again, the fact that only 3,000, I say only, but the fact that 3,000 are killed tells me that it's very unlikely that the Levites were all by themselves. Now, it is true that God told only the Levites to do the killing. So anybody who would have joined, said, I'm for God, okay, say from the tribe of Judah or from the tribe of Simeon or whatever, said, I'm with God, they didn't get the order. In other words, they were not told, go get your sword and start killing people, right? Okay. So, still, it's a gruesome scene, no question about it. And it's still very hard sometimes for modern believers to reconcile this scene, this event, with a loving God. Okay? But again, God's concern here is for the entirety of the people. And there must be a lesson here. There must be some discipline here. There must be some chastisement here in order for these people to get the idea this is not something good to do. This is not something you want to do. Okay? You do not want to blaspheme God. You do not want to thumb your nose at the Lord God Almighty. It's not a good idea. You need to learn this. We're not told why some were killed and many others were not. We're just given a number. We're just given 3,000. 3,000 people fell that day. And then what was left, okay, is to dedicate themselves to the Lord because of this. As it says, because every man has been against his son, his brother, whatever, okay. And this is done, this killing was done to put a blessing upon you today. In other words, this is God asking them to do a very difficult thing. Whoever they find who wants to worship the golden calf, doesn't matter what relation they are to them. Could be a son, could be a neighbor, could be a brother, might even be a father, okay? Doesn't matter, okay? You're not to pay any attention to blood relation. You find somebody who wants to worship the golden calf, you're to kill them, period, okay? And this will be a blessing on the people, right? In other words, I'm asking you to do something I know is difficult. I'm asking you to do something I know is going to be hard for you. And if you do it, that difficult thing, that will be a blessing. In other words, you will have shown your faith in me, and I will bless that. Okay? So you can say this is analogous to Jesus telling the apostles, you will be persecuted. You will be hauled before the judges. You'll be thrown out of the synagogues. You'll be whipped. You'll be killed in many cases. Okay? But you will gain the kingdom. Right? This is the same kind of idea. Okay? The thought that once you come into Christianity or once you become a believer, that your life then becomes easy, or your life becomes much more pleasant, or your life becomes prosperous, as Joel Osteen and other idiots proclaim, okay, is simply the opposite of the truth. The fact of the matter is, as long as you are an unbeliever, the devil has you in his pocket, and he's not all that interested in making your life miserable. I mean, he can, and he will, and he does, but he's already got you. You're an unbeliever. You're in his kingdom. You're on your way to hell. Why should he be concerned about causing you any grief? On the other hand, you come into God's kingdom, you become a believer, the devil is going to pull out all the stops. He's going to come after you both barrels. He's going to come after you nail and tong, right? And the only reason you survive and the only reason you maintain your saving faith is because of God. God either telling the devil, no, you can't do that. That's too far. That's too much. So-and-so can't handle that. I'm not going to let that happen. Okay? Or God giving you the strength and the ability and the wisdom to see your way through that particular trial. Okay? So the whole idea of prosperity Christianity, success Christianity, or I like to call it victorious Christianity. Okay? This whole idea of victory and success is unbiblical. And not only is it unbiblical, it's false in many, many cases, and also damaging sometimes, because then the idea comes, well, if I'm not successful, if I'm not prosperous, if I'm not healthy, if I don't get rid of this illness, whatever it is, or I don't get rid of whatever problem I'm having, or if I do lose my job, or my house gets taken by a tornado, or whatever, then the thought is, well, either A, God is mad at me, he's still holding my sins against me, or B, I don't have enough faith. Or maybe I don't have any faith at all. Maybe I just think I do. So this kind of preaching, this kind of teaching is actually very detrimental. It's very detrimental to individual believers, and it's very detrimental to the church, the kingdom of God, the invisible kingdom of God. And so it should be fought against, I believe, in great measure. Let's look at the notes for a few minutes. Page 264, number 1. The next episode is only sketched with a few rough lines. We read that Moses places himself at the entrance of the camp. His call, "Whoever's for the Lord, come to me," has become a quite famous phrase to invite people to listen to God, repent, and believe. Other translations render it with, "Who is on the Lord's side?" This was a call for people to identify themselves with the cause of the Lord. At this point, the people who came forward did not know what they would be required to do. The fact that they took a stand for the Lord meant that they turned against sin and evil. So again, this was a call out to all of Israel, and I believe very, very strongly that all of Israel responded. All people from the 12 tribes responded, not just the Levites. What happens next reminds us of Jesus' words, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." But in the situation Jesus refers to, the believer is the object of hostility. not the one who passes judgment. Here, the faithful ones execute judgment. And how do they execute this judgment? Again, they execute this judgment based upon the response of the people. Those who did not come to the entrance of the tent and stand with Moses. So the assumption was, if you did not go and stand with Moses, you must be for the golden calf. Imagine the scene. We read in verse 25 that people were running wild and that Aaron had let them get out of control. All this was still going on when Moses took his stand at the entrance of the camp. Here we note that the record of the events in this chapter is not given in chronological order. At the point where Moses calls for volunteer, the calf was still standing, and Moses had not yet melted it down and ground it up and forced the people to drink the water with the golden particles. Moses' call, therefore, is an effort to create order in chaos and to make the bedlam stop. Again, this is very common throughout the Bible and even in the Old Testament, where we seem to have, a pretty chronological order. But that's not always the case, and we should not allow that to get us confused. God records the events in the order in which they are important to Him and how they need to be important to us. So, for example, God in the earlier verses went forward in time in telling Moses how to record this and wanted to get to the kind of the end result. The end result was that Moses ground up the golden calf and made the people drink the water with the gold particles in it. Okay? But that is shooting forward. This event happens in between. And we see this in the New Testament constantly. We see the events of Jesus' ministry, for example, told in different orders according to the four gospel writers. Some gospel writers put an event earlier or seem to put an event earlier in Jesus' ministry, others later. Again, the chronological order does not seem to be all that important to God, and you can understand why. Chronological order is important to God because God has no chronology. Okay? God is not bound by time. God sees everything happening in all of time, from first words of creation to the judgment day, as happening all at once, as far as we're concerned. Okay? He sees the big picture, everything going on at once, all the time. And so He can pick and choose events out of that scenario and record them or have them recorded as He sees fit. Everybody had an opportunity to answer Moses' call, not just the Levites. Again, that's important to understand. We read that only the Levites came forward. This does not necessarily mean that nobody of the other tribes responded. In other words, I would find that incredibly hard to believe. It may be that the coming forward of the Levites was a matter of clan allegiance. Their blood relationship to Moses may have played a role, but we are specifically told that their come forward indicates that their first allegiance was to the Lord. The Levites were instructed to go through the camp and kill the people they knew personally, whom they saw participating in the orgy. That's why the words neighbor, brother, etc. are used. Okay? In other words, choose people you know were involved in this worship and have not come and stood with the Lord. In other words, they are still devoted or dedicated to the golden calf. Again, the people had not stopped the revelry yet at this point. So it would not be hard to identify the guilty ones. This is a little bit like the incident many years in the future with the next group. Okay, remember when they were camped at the foot of Mount Nebo, and the people were tempted, enticed by the women of the region into fornication. And again, the Israelites go through the camp and they kill the people who are involved in this fornication. And the Bible describes it as spearing them 2 by 2. In other words, they are in the act of fornication. They are in the act of intercourse, and they get speared through, the two of them, when they are together like that. In other words, this event and that event are much alike in that you can see the people choosing the golden calf. And you can see them choosing to worship the golden calf in a sexual way or in a sacrificial way or whatever, in some kind of worship sense. So Moses is not telling them, and God is not telling them, go kill indiscriminately. Just walk up to somebody and kill them. He's not talking about that. He's talking about kill the people that you know for a fact, that you see, that you have evidence that are participating in this blasphemy, in this idol worship. Okay? That's important to note here. We must note that Moses introduced the instruction with the words, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says." Okay? So Moses, again, he's not doing this out of anger. He's not doing this out of revenge. He's not doing this out of jealousy. He's not doing this because he wants to. He's doing this because this is exactly what God has told him to do. When the Levites are done with their gruesome work, 3,000 people have been executed. Considering that the entire population was over 5 million, this number is relatively small. Still, for us as New Testament believers, the report of this violent scene is difficult to digest and justify. Even if we do believe in the validity of capital punishment, we have a hard time with this kind of swift and complete judgment. It seems to be the opposite of what Jesus preached about, turning the other cheek. We have to remember, though, that Jesus spoke his words at a different time. Couple points. Israel in the desert was God's chosen nation. Not only were believers in the majority, but they were the subject of a theocracy. God's purpose with Israel was twofold. They were to be the receivers and channels of his revelation in the world, channels of salvation. They were also the instruments of his judgment. As such, they legitimately conquered Canaan and exterminated the nations living there. God sent his people to the promised land only when the sin of the Amorites had reached its full height. In other words, God had put up with the sin of the Amorites and the rest of the Canaanites for a long time. 500 years. Well, more than that, really, if you go back before Abraham. God had put up with their sin for a long time. And they could have returned to the Lord at any time. Remember, these people, a lot of these people and the nations around them especially, are relatives, okay, shirt-tail relatives, but still they're children of Esau, or they're children of others, or if nothing else, they're children of Ham, who had the true word. And so these people had the opportunity to go back to God over this 500-year period, and they did not. Matter of fact, their idol worship got worse. That's the idea when it says, and the fullness of their sin. In other words, their sin had got to the point where it was just, there was a point of no return. There's going to be no revival. There's going to be no opportunity for them to go back to God. And so God said, I've had enough with you. I've had it up to here with you. That's it. Okay? You're going to get wiped out. And the second one, so we must see this report of the massacre as an act of God against the background of Israel being a theocracy, and thus the Bible does not contradict itself and makes much sense. And Moses' words to the Levite, who had become the executioners, is quite plain, simple to explain. This is necessary. This is necessary for the good of the whole people. This is necessary to wipe out those who are so involved in this idol worship. This is the same reason that is necessary for the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites. And we know this because they did not. And we know that because they did not, and God even says this, he records it that way in the rest of the Old Testament. He says the reason that Israel continued to go back to idol worship is because they did not destroy all of those in Canaan who were idol worshipers. They did not complete the conquest. They left pockets of idol worshipers and false people worship false gods all throughout the land of Canaan, all throughout the Promised Land. They left in Jerusalem, for example. They did not conquer Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not conquered until many years, 400 years at least, after the Joshua. Jerusalem was not conquered until the days of David. David lives in 1000 BC. Joshua crosses the Jordan into the promised land about 1500. So 500 years they had the opportunity to conquer Jerusalem and destroy the Jebusites, that's what they were called, and they did not. And the Jebusites were idol worshippers. And so it's because of those people like the Jebusites, it's because of the Canaanites who were not killed, they infected the Jews during the entire period of the Judges, during the entire period of Saul, and so on, for hundreds of years, and caused them to fall away and caused them to worship idols. And God says this numerous times during this period. He says, because you did not destroy all these people, then that's what caused you to follow these false gods, and that's what caused me to have to come and discipline you. So for God to order the death of 3,000 people out of 5 million is a drop in the bucket in order to produce something better. In other words, in order to teach the Israelites not to do that again. Unfortunately, they didn't learn their lesson. But that's true of them throughout pretty much their whole history. Number 10. It doesn't seem to be an enviable way to receive God's blessings by having to kill one's relatives and friends. We consider it to be a sign of genuine dedication if a man is willing to die for his faith. In the case of the Levites, it was a matter of being willing to kill for their faith. I think that's a very interesting observation, if I do say so myself. We hear this a lot. Are you ready to die for your faith? Yes. Are you ready to kill for your faith? That's a whole different ball of wax. Okay? It really is. Okay? I've talked to, since I've been near Fort Bliss for 12 years, and now here for 28 years, I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of soldiers. And one of the things that's very common, I would say almost to a man, that I've talked to about on this subject, is the fact that, let's say a Marine, for example. I think Marines are good examples. Every single Marine, what's the saying? It doesn't matter what your occupational specialty is. It doesn't matter what your rank is. Every Marine, they have a saying, every Marine is a what? You know this by the little, every Marine is a rifleman. Every single one. I don't care if you're, a mechanic in the motor pool or what. It doesn't matter. Man, women, doesn't matter. You join the Marines, you're going to spend a lot of time on the firing line. And every single Marine you see is going to have that little badge, that little marksman badge. Okay? Every single one of them. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're in intelligence, doesn't matter if you're a signal, doesn't matter if all you do is radio operator, whatever. Every single one of them is going to have that. Okay? So, talked to a lot of Marines over the years. Okay? And a lot of them, of course, all of them are marksmen. All of them can, hit the eye of a squirrel at 1,000 yards or whatever. Okay, every single one of them. But every one of them say the same thing. It is night and day difference. It is 180 degrees difference between putting that bullet in that bullseye and putting that bullet in a human being. Every single one of them say the same thing. Now, I'm sure that there are psychos in the Marines. I've been told this, okay? And probably in the Army and the Navy too, for that matter, or whatever. There are psychos who, feel nothing at killing another human being. But the vast majority have a real problem with this. A real problem. And sometimes they will even say to their fellow soldiers or whatever, and guys have told me this, you're getting ready to go into a situation, or maybe somebody starts shooting at you, and it's time to shoot back. And sometimes one soldier will confess to the other soldier, I've never killed anybody before. I don't know if I can do this. and you got you got bullets, and so the one guy, the veteran, let's say, who's been through it a few times, says to the other guy, wake up and smell the coffee. It's either you or them, buddy. Okay? So yes, to die for the Lord is great. How did Patton put it? Remember, how did Patton put it? He said, I don't want to hear anybody dying for your country. You make the other blankety blank 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 die for his country. Okay? Now, how does that apply in New Testament believers? That's kind of tough. We don't usually think of that. We don't usually think of being called upon to kill for Jesus. Right? We don't usually think about that. We think about dying for Jesus. We think about the people who were thrown to the lions. We think about the people who were burned at the stake. We think about that. We don't usually think about the shoe being on the other foot. Okay, we usually that's where we usually think of Jesus. Forgive and turn the other cheek and all this kind of stuff. It was hard to us to imagine even a scenario where we're really where we're encouraged or where we're forced even to kill for the Lord. Okay. But, huh? Yeah. That's usually what we think. Okay, that's usually what we think. Okay. But I think all we have to do, I know it's hard, but I think it's possible for us to think about the scenario. All we have to do is think back to our ancestors of 200 years ago, right? And think, let's say you're living on the prairie in North Texas, on the other side of the Red River from Oklahoma, and you're living in Comanche territory. And the Comanches are very well known for killing all the men and taking the women as captives and turning those women into nothing less than animals, which is physical deprivation, but also spiritual deprivation. And there are plenty of recorded instances, actual historical recorded incidents, proof of women who have been recovered from that, who totally become Comanches. Okay? They've lost their identity as whatever they were before, and totally lost their faith, let's say in God or Jesus, lost their salvation. Okay? So that's a scenario where, you're being attacked. Okay? You may not think of it as killing for Jesus, all right? But in a sense, that's what it is. Okay? In a sense, that's what it is. You're killing to protect at least the women in your house, because you will be killed. They didn't take men captives. Well, maybe little boys they did, but not men usually. You kill them all. You will be killed. But to save the women in your house or your fort or whatever from being turned into animal, basically slaves, and very good chance of losing their saving faith. So you're really killing for Jesus, aren't you? Now, I know that's kind of an extreme example, and I know that example is hard to fathom for our future. But at least I think it gives us an idea of what this is talking about. Okay? This is why what the Levites did was actually a blessing. It was actually good for the whole country. You want to reduce the number of those, call them turncoat believers. Okay, you want to reduce the number of people who are easily led astray into idol worship and probably lead others astray to idol worship. You want to reduce that number as much as you can for the benefit, the spiritual, the eternal benefit of the majority. Okay.
Is this what they're doing to the sanctuary cities? thinking about getting rid of the sanctuary city.
Okay, that I suppose could be said. I mean, that's more in a societal view than a religious view. But yeah, if in these sanctuary cities you have, and I don't know, I haven't researched it all that much. It depends on who you listen to, depends on who you believe in the media. But let's just say, for sake of argument, that in these sanctuary cities there are a lot of Venezuelan gang members, M13 people who we know are very violent, who prey on people to sell them fentanyl and whatever to kill them, and who murder people indiscriminately and so on and so forth. To round them up and toss them out of the country, in a sense, separate them from their families even, if you want to call it that, would be for the good of the general population. Sure. Yeah. I would say that that's an analogous type of situation. Sure. Yeah. I would say that. Again, in a societal sense, or in a criminal or a criminality sense, not necessarily in a religious sense, but certainly I think it's justifiable in that view, that you want to reduce the number of troublesome people, I think, in general. I mean, that's just, again, whether it's religion or whether it's society, whether it's crime, violence, whatever you want to talk about, you want to reduce that number. Okay? You want to reduce that number. And if that means tossing them out of the country, separating families, whatever, again, the greater good is to be sought. Again, I say whether this would ever be a valid test of our dedication in our time is questionable, but possible. Again, it's hard to foresee a situation like, out in the western prairie or whatever 150 years ago. That's kind of hard for us to see going forward. But it's definitely possible. It's definitely definite that is a certain possibility. What the Levites did was not sinful or evil, but we have to be careful not, what did I mean there? Not to ages past to today. I don't know what that means. Not to apply, I guess, ages of the past today. I don't know what that sentence is supposed to do. Going on. Still, there are eternal norms which apply to every age in one form or another. What happens here was an expression of the wrath of God over sin, and is still an existing norm. It expresses itself in different form now, but the norm has not changed. The day will come when God's wrath will reveal itself again in a similar form as in the desert about 4,000 years ago. Jesus indicated this truth when he read the prophet Isaiah in the synagogue of Nazareth. In closing the book, when he did, Jesus indicated that the year of the Lord's favor had come, and that the day of vengeance would come later, right after that. If we cannot condemn the day of vengeance to come, so we cannot either condemn the day that lies in the past. So Jesus said that after his day would come the day of vengeance. That's the last day. And at the last day, you might say, there is no more mercy. There's no mercy at the last day. Mercy is for the time before the last day. That's when mercy, as long as there needs to be believers to come into the kingdom, as long as the last believer has not come into the kingdom, God is patient. When that last believer somewhere, Mozambique or Oklahoma City or wherever, when that last human being is converted, let's say the last infant baby is baptized, or the last 90-year-old all of a sudden decides, I'm going to be a believer in Jesus. Whenever that last person is, and there's going to be no more after that, which is kind of hard to fathom, frankly, but okay, when that last person has come into the kingdom, and there's going to be no more after that, not a single conversion after that, God will pull the ripcord. And mercy is over. There's no more mercy at that point. At that point, the unbelievers can't call to God and say, hey, wait a minute. Give me another 10 minutes. Give me another half an hour. Give me another day. I'll convert. As soon as Jesus appears on the horizon, we won't know, of course, when that last person is converted, except by the fact that Jesus appears in the sky. When Jesus appears in the sky, everybody is frozen immediately, instantaneously, in their spiritual condition. If you're a believer at that point, you can never be an unbeliever. If you're an unbeliever at that point, you can never be a believer. Everybody is frozen at that split second. Boom. And then there's no more mercy. It's gone. It's done. It's over. There's no second chance. Like the rapturists teach, the believers all leave, and then the others got 1,000 years to decide whether or not to come to faith. That ain't going to happen, folks. That ain't going to happen. Once Jesus appears, that's it. Mercy is done. Mercy's over. And he's coming, and he ain't got no mercy. He ain't got no forgiveness anymore for nobody who's an unbeliever. The unbelievers gathered together, they're pronounced guilty, they go to hell. That's the name of that tune. No ifs, no ands, no buts, no maybes. And I think a lot of Christians, certainly a lot of Christian churches today, with some exceptions, shy away from that quite a bit. And really don't want to talk about that very much. And that's kind of unfortunate. That doesn't do anybody any good. That's not helpful, let's put it that way. Okay? What circumstances can you think of, we've already talked about it, I guess, might be necessary for modern believers to kill for the Lord? Anything else besides what I said that comes to your mind or that you want to comment on? What's that? Oh, yeah. That's why some of our council people, at least one, sometimes more, are armed in church. You may have to do that. That's right. That's a good point. It's a very good point. Okay. I guess the council talked about this once a bunch of years ago. We talked about having a training session in church, and we were advised against it. Interestingly enough, by the Cochise County Sheriff's Department people, and I kind of understood their point. The guy said this. He said, well, yeah, I suppose you could have a training session, what to do in case, a shooter shows up. He said, but he said, all that does is upset the people that are there, get them thinking in the wrong direction, really, and maybe you have some very well-intentioned people who decide they can make a difference, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with a cannon. And so he said, I'm not sure that's a really good idea. He said, you'd be surprised. He said, you'd be surprised in situations, let's say this guy had been a part of the Cochise County SWAT group, and they're in situations, in crowd situations sometimes when they have this shooter that's going on. And he said, you'd be surprised at how obedient people are when a law enforcement person shouts, or anybody, a leadership person, for example, shouts real loud, everybody down. He said, most people don't need to be trained to know what everybody down means or take cover. Okay? Most people don't need to be told what that means. Okay? So, I think, if I, or let's say Steve Cost or Tony here, we see something like this and we just yell, everybody down or everybody take cover, I don't think there'll be too many people going, huh? What? You know, I really don't, okay? And then we depend upon those, some of which are in law enforcement now or were, some of which were in the service or were, who are packing heat, as they say. We count on them to be able to hit the broadside of a bar. Okay, we kind of count on them to be good shots. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. That's probably the most common one, I think, at this point that we can foresee. Of course, the other one that people sometimes talk about is, you know, the complete breakdown of society. We have the complete breakdown of society where you really can't call 911 anymore. You can't expect the cops to come and bail you out, right? Some people think that's very close. Some people think that's yet quite far away. I don't know. Could go either way, frankly, at this point.
Isn't that what's happening in these sanctuary cities? Really?
In some cases, yeah. Well, see, what I predict as a politician, as a person who's knowledgeable in politics and very knowledgeable in history, what I predict could possibly happen. You've got a segment of society who are basically thumbing their nose at the current administration and saying, no, we're not going to obey you. We're not going to do what you tell us to do. We've also got a segment of society, in this case mostly judges, liberal judges, who are telling the administration, you can't do what you're doing. I think of these Venezuelan gang members, for example, who were on their way back to Venezuela on the plane, and the judge ordered the planes to turn around and bring them back. To me, I mean, this goes to a very deeper point, and a point I think that the society, both politically and socially, has to work out. And that is just exactly the defining line with the power of these judges. Did the founders, for example, really expect and really believe that the judges would be the final and complete and ending arbiter of all that is right and good and wrong, right and wrong and everything? I don't think so. I certainly don't see that in the Constitution. Okay, they have become that way because nobody's basically been gutsy enough to tell them off. But is that really true? I don't know. And you've got these judges all over the country. They've got a judge in Seattle, let's say, making a ruling on something happening in Florida. You've got a judge in Washington, D.C. deciding something in Texas. I think there's going to be some pushback. I think there's going to be some blowback. And what I predict might happen is that the present administration, and Mr. Trump is a kind of person who I think would be willing to do this, may simply suspend, as Lincoln did, suspend habeas corpus, and do that. Suspend habeas corpus. In other words, I don't have to turn these people over to whomever you say, Mr. Judge. That's what Lincoln did. Okay? Whether you agree with Lincoln or not, that's what he did. Okay? He basically put what he felt were Southern sympathizers, Confederate sympathizers, in jail. And when the judges said, no, you can't do that, you have to let them out, you have to allow their families to come and get them, or you have to let their friends come and get them, whatever, Lincoln said, no, I don't. Make me. Make me. I foresee something like that happening. I really do. I foresee Trump saying, no, make me. And then look out, folks. I mean, I don't say that precipitated the war between the states, but it was certainly very controversial, and had not other things been going on at that time, may have precipitated that. But there needs to be a real discussion about how much power these guys really have. All the way up to the Supreme Court. Is the Supreme Court really the arbiter of what's right and wrong? Not really. That wasn't the point. It's not right and wrong. They were to the arbiter. It's right. It's to be. Is it not even good or bad? That wasn't the issue. Is it constitutional or not? That's the only thing they're supposed to decide. They're not supposed to decide anything else. They're not supposed to decide if it's good for the society or bad for the society. They're not supposed to say if it's legal or illegal. They're not supposed to decide anything. All they're supposed to decide is, does it fit into the realm of the Constitution or not? Or is it really what they're asked to decide? Is it against something in the Constitution?
Isn't there a thing called jurisdiction also, where I always feel that if a person's on a plane flying somewhere, and then they tell the pilot, come back, hold it, I'm out of your jurisdiction.
Doesn't seem to be that way. Now, interestingly enough, we're a little far afield from Exodus, but that's okay. Interestingly enough, just the other day, the state of Utah decided, they passed a law in their legislature that basically said, we're going to make areas of jurisdiction, okay? And we take for ourselves all of our natural resources, all of our land and property as belonging to us, not the federal government. And we will decide, the state will decide what is legal and illegal on those properties, not the federal government.
Sell that land,
Yeah.
federal government's permission.
And this is a big deal. It really is. It didn't get played up by the networks much or by the news media much, but it's a big deal. If all 50 states did that, or let's say 25 states did that, and they basically told the federal government, go toot your own horn, whatever, we're going to do what we want to do. Well, I don't know about anarchy, but definitely that is a civil war. That is a civil war, basically. Now, if you look at the wording of the 10th Amendment, you could say that it's all constitutional for the states to do that. But then again, that's been true for a long time since the Constitution was passed, and very seldom has it been enforced. So again, this is going to have to be decided somehow, some way. And I don't know exactly how it's going to be decided, but it's going to have to be decided at some point. All right, we got a few minutes. Let's read at least the last few verses of that chapter, and then we'll spend the rest of the time on the notes. The next day Moses said to the people, "You yourselves have committed a great sin. And now I'm going up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for you." And Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Alas, this people has committed a great sin. They've made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will, forgive their sin. And if not, please blot me out of your book which you have written." The Lord said to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But go now and lead the people where I told you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I will punish them for their sin." And the Lord smote the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron had made. Okay. So notice what Moses does here. Moses is not called to the mountain. Every other time that Moses goes up the mountain, Mount Sinai, he is called by God to do that. This time he goes by himself. This time he goes on his own initiative. God did not ask him to come see him. So he not only touches the mountain, he climbs the mountain and goes back up to where he had been speaking with God. This is pretty gutsy. This is pretty bold. God said anybody who touches the mountain is without my invitation, I'm going to kill him. So this is pretty gutsy. And Moses is going to try and make atonement for their sin. And so he asks God to forgive them. And then he says something even more amazing. He says, if you don't want to forgive them, then take out your anger on me and blot me out of your book of life. That's basically what he's talking about. In other words, send me to hell. Moses is willing to go to hell for the people. Wow. Wow. That's pretty amazing. That's a sacrifice above a sacrifice. Moses said, whoever sinned to me, I will blot him out of my book. Now again, if you think of it, okay, this includes obviously those 3,000, okay, but obviously includes others who are coming. Okay, and there's a lot more rebellion, unfortunately, there's a lot more rebellion against God yet to come. A lot. Tremendous amount, a lot. And he says, I will send my angel. Now later on we find out that God did not intend to go with them anymore. We see that in the next chapter. God basically told Moses later on, he says, I can't go with you anymore. I can't lead you anymore. Because I'm going to paraphrase this. I can't trust myself. You people are so obnoxious. You people are so stiff-headed and rednecked, whatever, that if I go with you, I'll wipe you out. If I go with you and this happens again, don't blame me. I'm just gonna wipe you all out. And so if I go with you, you don't want that. I'm going to send my angel with you. Now, is this the angel of the Lord, pre-incarnate Christ? I don't know. Is it just another angel, Gabriel, whatever? I don't know. It doesn't happen, by the way, just so you know. Spoiler alert. It doesn't happen. But we don't know exactly what he had in mind here. This would have taken away the pillar of cloud, pillar of smoke, of course. Okay. And later on, Moses says that's one of the things I don't want. I don't want that to go away because that's what's keeping the people a lot of times in line and keeping them going. But anyway, that's what God says. I'm not going with you no more. You just lead them. I'll send an angel along with you to help. But you just go on by yourself, and I'm going to punish them. Now, I think what he means by this is he's thinking forward. He's thinking forward. He knows that the people are going to rebel, of course, at Kadesh Barnea after the spies come back, with their report about giants in the land. Oh my goodness, there are giants in the land. And so they refuse. They want to go back to Egypt. And at that point, God said, that's it, I'm done with you. I had it with you. And you're all going to die in the wilderness, which is exactly what happened. They all did. So I think this is what he's talking about here. I will punish them. Don't worry, I will punish them. There are some Bible scholars, theologians, who believe that every single one, not just the 3,000, but every single one of that generation went to hell as unbelievers. I don't believe that. I don't think you can make that case, really. But there are those who believe that. So 5 million people. Nobody was saved. Well, again, 600,000 men and another 700,000 women that age. So all the adults. So half of that group, let's say. All were damned. I don't know about that. I'm not sure you can really make that case. I understand why they say that, but I'm not sure you can make that case. Okay. We'll pick it up. We have to discuss the rest of chapter 32 then, what we just read, which will take a few more pages, and then we'll go on to 33. And so before we do that, though, we'll go through these notes. Anything else? Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen. You betcha.